Hello, everybody. So this is lecture one for week 10. Bring your attention to a couple of things here on the website before we get started. So the first thing is that down here in the assignments, you have two labs this week. Like last week, the lab 10B, you don't really have to turn in anything. You just have to say that you're done with it. I do, strongly recommend that you actually watch the video and run the code just so you know what's going on. Um, but yeah, two labs, a reading and a homework, and that's it. Normal week. All right. So having said that, we'll go ahead and get started here. This is lecture one. So there's a set of lecture slides here that I will download and we'll open. All righty. So what this is about is arrays. So arrays are a new topic for us. We've been working with strings and things, but arrays are slightly different. And what are they? So an array is a data structure that stores a fixed number of elements of the same type. What does that mean? It means it's a list. It's basically just a list um, of a bunch of things of the same type. I'm looking for a clips down here. Here it is. So if I make just let's say file new Java project, let's call it array example. Let's make a new class inside there. Let's call that array example. Put a main method in there, and there we go. So of course, we know that you can do int x equals, let's say 17, right? There you go. There's a number, right? This is one integer value in the variable x, right? So easy peasy. What if we want multiple values? So what if I want a list of 17, 14, 11, 9, 33, 99, 107, right? I want something like this, a list of integers. Well, that is an array. Now, I didn't quite type this the right way. In order to type this the right way, you have to tell the compiler that we want to make an array. And the way you do that is next to the variable type, in this case, an integer, you put square brackets. You open them and close them. So int square brackets y, and then you can list out your array. That is one of the ways to declare an array. We'll see the others in in the slides. So there you go. It's a list. So when we say a fixed number of elements of the same type, we mean a list of them. So like a list of integers or a list of strings, right? There's nothing that makes us do this only for integers. So I can do string square brackets and I can just put, whoa, I hit enter by accident there. So I could say Greg, Nick, Shannon. That's me, my brother, and my sister. I need to give it a name. Names, right? So you can have a list of words. That could be an array. So it allows grouping related data under one variable name. And this is another way to declare an integer. So if you don't know what the values need to be, then you can make a new integer array, for example. And the 5 here indicates that we just need 5 spots to store the numbers. So if I come here and I say, like under here, I go int square brackets for an array, z, and then I say new int, and I put 5 here, then this is going to be an array of 5 integers. Right now, they're all 0. They're all 0. And they're all 0 just because I didn't put anything in them yet. And when you run this new integer, new int 5, it fills in the zeros. So this one up here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 integers, right? So this is 7 integers array. So this one's 7 because I typed in 7. This one's 5 because I didn't type them in, but I made it a new integer array with 5 things. So we have 5 things because we said so with the 5. So there's 2 ways to declare them, and we'll see that here. So this says example int square bracket scores equals new int 5. So that's a 5 integer array. So the two types are to declare the array type and name, or this is the 2 steps, sorry. Declare the array type and name, and then create the array using the new keyword. This is all done in 1 step here. This would create an integer array with 10 things. Now, you can separate the declaration of the variable and the initialization, just like you can for other things. So like this line, of course, is correct, but I could also just do int square bracket z and then say z equals new int 5, right? So I can separate this to be on 2 lines, declare the z variable, and then fill in the z variable with 5 things. Um, or you could do them on the same line, which is what generally you will do. So the highlighted way is more likely to be used by us. The other way you can initialize an array is to assign the values at declaration time. And we've seen this already. That's what I did when I filled in the numbers. Here's another string array with colors, red, green, blue. Um, all right, cool. Now, after that, you need to be able to access them. You put the things in a list, but now what? And so you have to access them by their position in the list. And that involves using an index, just like you do when you're getting a character from a string with, char at, like char at 0 to get the first letter, char at 1 to get the second letter, and so on. It's the same exact indexing with arrays. It's just you put it in square brackets to access it. So if I were to head over here, if I run my code, right, my code runs, but we don't see anything because all I did was I just declared like a bunch of arrays. If I want to see it on the screen, I can do system.out.println. And what are we trying to print? Well, like if I want to print my name is in the names array, so that's names. And if I want to print the first name, I put a 0 there. Oops, I put a 0 there, right? So that should print Greg. Let's see. It does. Well, what if I want to print my brother's name? I want to print Nick. I put a 1 there. Nick. What if I want to print Shannon, my sister's name? Put a 2 there. It auto completed an extra bracket just a second ago, so I have to delete that. Right? So you can access any of these you want just with the correct index. And it's the same thing for the integers up here. So like if I want to get the 99, the variable is called y. So that's y, but we need square brackets because it's an array. And then where's the 99? It's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That's actually the 6th number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but the indices start at 0, so it's position 0, position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5. So if I put a 5 here, I should get 99 printed out. And we do. So that's how you access individual elements of the array. Now, just to show you, if you do create an array using this new thing, I'll put this back up here. It doesn't matter. If you do use like new int 5 to create your array, then if I do like z0 to see what z0 is in this array, you'll see that it is in fact 0. And if you go, what is z3, right? That's the 4th element. It's also 0, right? So these are all 0 if you create it with new int. If you type them out, then of course you get the ones that you typed in. Okay. Now, having said that, like we can print out like Z3 and it's 0, but you can also change the values once you can change the values in your program, right? So I could also say, like, we know that Z3 just printed out as 0, but if I say Z3 is 9999 and then I print it out, well, now it's 9999, right? So you can change these values in the array after the array is declared. So if you want to change a specific number, you can just do that by putting um, the one that you want to change on the left side of the equal sign and what you want to change it to on the right side of the equal sign. So this is an example of reading the first number in the array called primes. And this is an example of writing a number 13 into the array called primes. So we can read the values from the array and we can write the values into the array. Now, if you think about it, let's go back here. Let me print names. Now, if I print names 0, we already saw that I'm going to get Greg. If I print names 1, we already saw that I'm going to get Nick. And if I type names 2, I'm going to get Shannon. But the indices here are 0, 1, and 2. That's why when we printed index 2, we get Shannon. What happens if you try to go to 3? You get an error, right? It'll say index 3, which is what we tried, is out of bounds for length 3 because this has a length of 3. And so the big thing that they're going to try to make a point of, and this is in SciBooks, which we'll see as soon as we're done with the slides, the big problem, not problem, but thing that they want you to understand is that the length is one more than the last index, or said another way, right? The last index is the length minus 1, right? So when the length is 3, the last index is 2. So you have to be aware of this. Length is 3, last index is 2, and it's always going to be that way. So if you need to get the length of an array, then you can put the array name and then dot length. No parentheses on that, by the way. No parentheses to get the length. So if I want to know, like, what is the length of this array, instead of names 2, I could say names dot length. And the length is 3, right? How long is the array Z? Z dot length. 5. Of course, we know it's 5 because it's 5 because I typed in a 5 there, right? What about Y? Well, we could count them. I think we counted 7, right? But if we just put Y dot length, we'll see if if I know how to count. 7. Yeah. Um, Now you can't do this for things that are not arrays, right? If I try X dot length, that should be a problem, right? X does not have a length because it's just one number, not in an array. So we can get the length. That is the point. Now, when you're doing anything with an array, a lot of times what you need to do is loop through the array. You need to do something for every element of the array, right? It's like, so for example, if I wanted to try to print like this entire array here, the entire Y array, I could print Y0, right? If I print Y0, that's going to be the 17. If I want to print the next number 14, right, then I would have to go same thing, but put a 1 there. If I want to print the 11, same thing, but with a 2 there. If I want to print the 9, same thing, but with a 3 there, right? So we were printing some of the numbers in the array. Right now we're printing 17, 14, 11, 9. 17, 14, 11, 9. Um, but you obviously don't want to do this if you're trying to print out an entire array. So instead of actually typing all these print statements here, you would want to do it in a loop, right? We learned about for loops. So we learned that you could do for and int I equals 0. Let's start it at 0. If there's 7 things in here, the last index is 6. So I'm going to say I less than 7, which will stop at 6. And then I plus plus, that will loop from 0 to 6. And then inside here, I can just take one of these print statements. And instead of printing Y3, I could put in YI. And now when I print this, or when I run this, we're going to get the entire array. We're going to get the entire array because it's going to start at index 0 and go all the way up to index 6. Now, the thing is that you wouldn't want to type your arrays this way, because if I go up here and I delete one element from the array, now my code is going to fail. It tried to print the entire array, but now my array only has 6 things in it instead of 7, but I didn't change the counter. So the counter still went up to 6, but there's no entry 6 because the last entry is 5, right? And it even says that index 6 out of bounds for length 6. That's because the last index is 1 less than the length. So the last index is 5, and I tried to access index 6. So you don't want to fill in that number there where the 7 is. That's where you want to use the length. So y dot length minus 1. Sorry, just y dot length. We don't need the minus 1 there because we want less than the length. So it won't go all the way to the length. So like the problem here was index 6 is out of bounds for length 6. But if I is less than the length, then the last entry that it will try to access is 5 because it's less than 6, not less than or equal to 6. So with this code here, I can run it and it will run and we get all 6 elements. If I add a couple more, then we get the couple more printed. If I take away some, then it still works, right? If I paste them back, it prints them all again, right? So when you're looping through an array, you can just remember to start your counter. Oops. Start your counter at 0. So I equals 0. Have I less than the length of the array, and then I plus plus. And then in your loop, you access element yi. If you change the index, of course, you'll have to change it here. So, right, if I change this I to j, then, I would have to change all the i's to j's, right? To make everything consistent. Okay. So you can do this for, any kind of array. So like if I wanted to loop through the names array, I would just change the y to names and change it here, names. Now it prints all the names in the list. Okay. Now, this is the exact same type of loop that I just did. The only thing that's weird is that this curly brace probably should be down here, and the indenting is not correct. Now, there is a thing called an enhanced for loop. So an enhanced for loop is a way of writing a for loop that you have not seen before. And it's a new way to type a for loop, and you do not have to use the length of the array, and you do not have to use the index I. either. So the way this works for this enhanced for loop, it'll be better if I write it here. We'll do the exact same thing. So what you do is in your for loop, instead of having int j equals 0, j less than names dot length, j plus plus, what you can do is you put uh, a variable for one of the things in your array. So like if I want to try to print the names in the names array, I could just say, well, how about for the string, let's say in, and then where do I want to get the string in? I want to get the string in from the names array. So I just put names here. So I'm not referring to the length. There's no index variable. Maybe I'm going to change this to name. Sometimes people like this and sometimes they think it's confusing. So string name colon names. So names has more than one name, and name is going to be one name from names. Is that confusing? I don't know. But then we can print system.out.println name. So we're going to get the names twice, basically. Once this is from the first for loop, and the bottom three are from that for loop that we just wrote. And so this is kind of this is an easier to write version of the for loop because I don't have to use the index variable I or j, and I don't have to say names I like we did here or names j as it is up here. I can just pick I pick a name for the variable, and the variable is going to be one element. So like it's basically for, and you go um, one element and then column colon, and then you do the array name. That's kind of how it looks. That so I'm going to delete this one and write a different one. So for example, like if I want to try to print out all the numbers in Y, you just say for, and I'll say like int, we need a variable. So I don't know, I'll call it A. Where is A coming from? It's coming from the array Y. And then if I do system.out.println and I just put A there, it will automatically, this will print the entire Y array. So it printed the entire Y array. So you pick a variable for one element on the left side here, and then the right side of the colon, and it is a colon, not a semicolon, is the name of the array. What a lot of people do is they name their array to make it obvious that it's plural. Like they would call it like numbers, for example. And you know there's more than one number because it has the S on it, right? And then that way, when they're writing their for loop, they can do something like this: int number from numbers, print number. That's exactly what I did with name and names, but this time number and numbers. So the array is numbers, and number is one number from numbers. Of course, you don't have to do that if you find it confusing. You can do kind of similar names, but not identical. So you can say like int num from numbers, something like that. That's a good way to do it. Um, yeah. So people do this in real life because it is faster to type and you don't have to think about the, index and the length and that kind of thing. But in zyBooks, I don't think they use this very much at all. So you should be aware that it exists and you should use it when you feel like it. You should know how to read it, but I don't think you're required to really in the zyBooks work. All right, let's keep going. So common array errors. Well, you can't access elements that don't exist. So if your array is length 5, you cannot access, element number 10. if your length is 5. There's also a null pointer exception. A null pointer exception is really a C or C++ thing, not really a Java thing. You do get an error. If you use an uninitialized array, you get an error, but it won't even run. So like if I did this, for example, if I just said int, I need a new array, I'll just call it array. No, let's call it ARR. So like I just created an integer array, right? Oops. If I try to print it out, if I try to print it out, if I change this to like ARR, right, I get immediately a little symbol indicating that there's an error. And if I try to run it, it's just not going to run. And it says the local variable ARR may not have been initialized. So it's not a null pointer exception. We don't see those words, but it is an uninitialized variable. So variable may not have been initialized. So I declared it, but I didn't put anything in it. There was no array. So I created the variable name, but I didn't use new int to make it all zeros. I didn't type in numbers to put in numbers. So I created a variable called ARR, but I never put a number in it. So it doesn't really exist yet. It's not initialized. All right. So summary, always store multiple values or arrays store multiple values of the same type. So a bunch of integers or a bunch of strings or a bunch of doubles or whatever. The indices start at 0. You use for loops to access elements. The array length gives the number of elements in the array, and arrays are fixed size once created. So you cannot change the size. So if you create this array with, I don't know how many things are in it now, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you create the array with 8 things, you can't change the size and make it 9 things. You can't change the size and make it 3 things. If you need to do that, there are ways to do that in Java, but not with the array type. We're using arrays, and arrays can't change length. All right. Now it says practice exercises, but we don't want to do that. Let's go to Zybooks and look at the exercises there. So we go here, we'll jump to the week 10 reading, which should be arrays. Well, first it talks about variable scope, which I'm going to talk about next time, so I'm not going to talk about it right now. And then we'll talk about arrays. So they're going to explain basically everything I explained to you, except that when it says general, that means they're not going to make it Java specific. So the concept of, having this is an array called points per quarter, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. And the numbers inside the array are 22, 19, 12, and 28. So if they say, how many points in the fourth quarter? Well, if the first one's quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, then the fourth quarter they scored 28 points. And in order to read it, you have to access index 3, right? So they're going to try to get across this idea of the indices starting at 0 and accessing a specific element from the array. So there's not a lot to do here. I'll do like this just to make sure we're on the same page, the participation activity. So like if it says, this is my items array, update my items with my items 4 equals 49. So you go to 4 and here, and you just change that to a 49. Okay. Right, let's go to, can I jump ahead? Let me jump ahead. Oh, you can't jump ahead on these. Update my items with my items 2 equals 60. So you find index 2, go over here, you change it to 60. Right? Not a lot to these. They do get a little more complicated. So my item 6 equals my items 3. So the one that we're changing is my item 6. So you go down here to 6. This is the one that we're changing. And what are we changing it to? We're changing it to whatever is in my items 3. So my items 3 is currently 46. So this side is 46, and we're going to take the 46 and we're going to put it in my item 6. Okay, same deal here. The one we're changing is my item 6. So you go down here to my item 6, and it's supposed to be my item 0, which we see is 58. Um, my item 6 equals my item 6 plus 5. So the one we're changing is my item 6. And what are we doing? We're taking my item 6, which is 82, and then we're adding 5. So we're adding 5 to the 82, and it will be 87. All right. Same thing here. My items 1 equals my items 1 plus 1. So we're going to my items 1, and we're just adding 1 to it. So it should be, was 16, add 1, it'll be 17. Okay. So there's more. These are similar exercises. I want some challenge exercises. So I'll go to the next section where they're actually talking about Java. So we'll do a couple of these participation activities first, just to make sure we understand the Java syntax, and then we'll go to the challenge exercises. So how many elements in memory does the array declaration create? So you have to look at the declaration, which is here, and you would realize new int 4 means, four entries. So this should just be 4. What value is stored in years ARR1? Well, years ARR1 is right here. So they put in a 2012. With what value does current year equal years ARR2 assigned current year? So basically, we're going to read years ARR2. So years ARR2 is 2025. So we're going to put 2025 into current year. With what value does current year equal years ARR3 assigned current year? Um, okay. So this is not, I won't say sneaky, but there's 4 integers here, right? Because we did new int 4. So there's a years ARR0, that's the first one. Years AR2, or 1, that's the second one. Years ARR2, that's the third one. But there is one more, right? Years ARR3. They just didn't put a number in there. And they didn't put a number in there in this section of the code. But they did put a number there in this section of the code. Because when you do new int 4, it fills the array in with zeros. So there is a years ARR3, and it has a 0 in it. So it's kind of a sneak here, because they kind of wanted to get you to say invalid index because they didn't declare it up here, but actually the line above it put in a 0. All right. Recall that the array declaration was this. Okay. Is current year equals years ARR4 a valid assignment? And the answer is no. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said they're really going to make a big point out of the fact that the last index is 1 less than the length. So if the length is 4, the last index is 3. So this is not valid because there is no years ARR4. The last one is 3. Okay. What is the proper way to access the first element? Well, the index starts at 0. What are the contents of the array if the above code is followed by years ARR0 equals years ARR2? So they're going to take years ARR0 and they're going to replace it with the value that's in ARR2. So they're going to put a 2025 in, replacing the 1999. So it's going to start out 2025. What is the index of the last element? Okay, so here's an array. It has 100 things in it. What is the last element? 99. One less, right? Okie dokie. Then they are going to, this is an example of filling in an entire array one by one by one. Um, they're probably going to loop through it. Here they are. And here is a loop through an array for us to look at. So when we're looping through an array, what you want to remember is that the index starts at 0. The index we want to be less than the array length, less than, not less than or equal, and then plus plus I. I usually write I plus plus. They write plus plus I. The compiler is going to do the exact same thing in this situation, so it doesn't matter. And then they're printing it out. So they are printing out their array, which is what you can see here. They printed out an array. All right. Now regarding this, let's just see if we can follow the code. It says, what is user vals dot length? So it's a little bit convoluted. They had a constant, remember those? Final int num elements 8. So they had a constant that was number of elements, num elements, and it was 8. And then they declared a new array with num elements. So of course, num elements is 8. So this array is 8, right? 8 things. So what is user val's length? 8. How many times does each for loop iterate? Well, this one I know goes 8 times because it starts out at 0 and it goes less than the length, which means it goes up to 7. But if you count on your fingers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you'll find that that's 8 things, right? So this for loop is definitely 8 times, which means, well, this one's the same kind of setup. So this one's also 8 times. So they're both 8. Which one line of code can be changed to allow the user to enter 100 elements? So the point that they're trying to get across here is that, here they're using the length of the array. Here they're using the length of the array. But if you wanted to make one change that just made this whole thing still work, the whole point of this constant up here was that if you change the 8 to something else, then the rest of the code will, adjust, right? Because if you put, let's say you put 100 right here in place of the 8, then this line would be 100 element array. And then the length of the array would be 100, and then the length of the array here would be 100. So you just change this 8 to any other number, and everything still works. So this is the one that you change. All righty. You should do these, to make sure they make sense, but like write a single statement to declare an array of ints named myvals, each initialized to 10. So you would probably have to do myvals. Actually, you'd have to write int square brackets myvals equals, and if you wanted 4 elements all 10, you'd have to go 10 comma 10 comma 10 comma 10. You'd have to type them all in. If you wanted them all zeros, you could use new int. Given int max scores equals 20, 20, 150, what is max scores 3? So count starting at 0. 0, 1, 2, 3. So max scores 3 should be 50. All right. So enter the output. All right, this is going to be just printing arrays, so let's not spend too much time on it. I want to do well, this is a challenge exercise, but I want to do the ones where we write code. So What's happening here is they have a constant for the length of the array, 3. They created a new array with 3 things in it. They put in 3 numbers, and then they have a for loop. And you should be able to start looking at this kind of for loop here and seeing that they're looping through an array, right? We see it starting at 0. We see it going to the array length, and that's a clue that we're looping through the array. And then you see them accessing user vals I, which is they're reading from the array. And yeah, so we should look at this and just understand that we're looking at a loop through the array. And we are specifically printing out the values, right? Because there's system.out print line and then user vals I. So it's going to print the array. That's what this does. And it's going to print a 3, a 4, and a 9 because that's what's in the array. And their print line, so it's 3 enter, 4 enter, 9 enter, right? So we recognize this just as printing an array. Let's look at this one. Well, down here, I can still recognize this as printing an array. So um, you want to not have to read the code so carefully. And the way that you do that is you need to start recognizing larger sections of code. So we look at this, just eyeball it and go, that is printing the array. And then you say, okay, so what array are we printing? So we made an array that had 358, and then we did user val 0 equals user val 0 plus 1. So what did that do? It took user val 0, which is the top value, and it added 1. So instead of being 358, it is 458. So when we print it, 458. Okay. So this is very similar, so I'll skip it. This is also similar, but we'll do this one. So what do? We've got a for loop that prints the array, just like before. We have the numbers 269 in the array, but then it does user val 0 equals user vals 1. And so the key to doing these right is to make sure you understand the one on the left of the equal sign is the one that's changing. So we're changing this to, and we're changing it to what? To user vals 1, which is 6. So instead of being 269, we're changing the 2 to be a 6. It'll be 669. All right. This is just about the same, but they're trying to be a little sneaky about it. So they're starting out with 3, 4, 7. And if you're keeping track, 3, 4, 7, that's what you have. And then when it does user val 0 equals user vals 2, we're changing the top value, 3, and replacing it with user vals 2, which is 7. So we're getting rid of the 3 and we're replacing it with 7. And then the next line here, now we're changing user vals 2, which is the 7. Well, this 7, because we already changed the array, and we're replacing it with user vals 1, which is 4. So we're replacing this 7 with a 4. So we end up with 744 when it's all done. And then we're printing it. 744. I got it wrong? Oh, I just didn't hit enter. Okay. So if we follow this one, we're going to be um, organize the lines of code to create 2 for loops that print all the elements in course grades, following each element with a space, print forwards, then backwards. Okay, so we'll worry about backwards later. Let's figure out how to do it forwards. So um, if we were trying to print the array, the way that we've seen printing an array started with a for loop that looked like this one. Not this one, right? Like this one, it says I equals course grades dot length minus 1. and then I greater than or equal to 0. That's not how we were used to seeing it. We were seeing it this way. I start out at 0, I less than course grades dot length, right? So we'll put this in, start our for loop that way. Also, I'm going to take one of these curly braces and I'm going to drop it in the right place so that they're matching. And then what are we doing? So it says we want to print all elements from course grades followed by a space. So to print an element from course grades followed by a space, I guess this will do it. There's actually two of the same line. So I'll just take one of them. And there we go. So this will print the course grades and then put a space after it. And it says after each loop, print a new line, which there's two lines that do that. So the one that I've highlighted is one of the ones that does it. So what we've just done is print out the course grades and then print a new line. All right. Now, then it says to do that. It says to do it forwards and backwards. So I'm going to go over to Eclipse momentarily and just show you. Let me get rid of this one. Let's get rid of this one. There's an extra line there. Deleting most of this. All right. So I should have code that prints names, Greg, Nick, Shannon. Okay. Now, the way that this is printing, right? It's printing index 0 and then index 1 and then index 2, right? Because the counter starts at 0 and it goes less than the length. If you want to print it backwards, you would need a loop that goes to 1, 0, right? That's the difference. So instead of counting 0, 1, 2, you would want to go 2, 1, 0. And if you think about how to do that, then when you write your counter, you would not want the I to start at 0 now, right? We want it to start at the last index. And we remember that the last index of the array is the length minus 1. So I would have to do names.length minus 1. So you have to remember to subtract 1. So that'll be the 2. And we want to do this until we get to 0. So we want to keep doing this as long as the I values are greater than or equal to 0. Greater equal 0. So that way the last I value is going to be 0. And then to make it count down, we want to go 2, 1, 0. Instead of J++ to count up by 1, we're going to use a minus minus to count down. So I minus minus or minus minus I. There we go. So you just change those numbers in the loop and then it will count the other way. So if I change this to I, it should now print backwards. Now it does Greg, Nick, Shannon, and then it does Shannon, Nick, Greg. So first time through, it's Greg, Nick, Shannon. Second time through, Shannon, Nick, Greg. Okay. So you need to start the counter at the length minus 1. You want to go as long as the counter is greater than or equal to 0. And you want to subtract 1 every time. That's how to do it backwards. So having said all that, that's what they're doing here. So they're starting the counter at the course grades dot length minus 1, counter greater than or equal to 0, and I have I minus minus, they have minus minus I, same difference in this case. So we just got to put this underneath, line it up in the right place. I'll put in the curly brace because I like having those in already. And then to print it out, we just need to print out the element, same as before. Notice that the line inside did not change. And then we need to print the print line at the very end. Now, what I mean by that is like this was system.out print line names J, and this was system.out print line names I. Like we didn't have to adjust this middle line for printing, right? It was the counting that changed. Instead of counting up, we counted down, but the actual print statement was identical, or it would have been if the counter was the same variable name. Same thing here. So they used I for both of them, so they look identical. The system dot out print looks identical, I mean. All right. So it prints them right forwards and it prints them right backwards. Okie dokie. Now let's look at time. We'll finish this exercise and then the later exercises will be in the next video. So let's see what it says. Declare an array of floating point numbers named user points with size num vals. Okay, so let's just do that. I can't tab. Okay, now I can tab. So to declare an array of floating point numbers, we're going to do double, right? And to make it an array, you do square brackets, and then you name it user points, and then it equals. And to declare it and have it with a certain length, in this case, 6, what you do is you do new double, and in square brackets, you put the length. So like if I put a 6 there, that would give me length 6. But they don't want me to type a 6 there. They want me to use, instead of typing 6, they want me to use this constant num vals. So replace that. Then it says, then read each element of user points from input. Okay, so now they want us to loop through and read all of these in. So to loop through an array, we have to remember how to do that, right? Now there is kind of, you can look down here for how to loop through an array, but we should remember, right? You say I equals 0. Don't say int I equals 0 like that, because this tries to create a new variable called I, and the variable I already exists. So you can't do that. So it needs to just be I equals 0 in this case. We want I to go up to the length of the array. So that's going to be I less than user points dot length, right? We've seen this a number of times now. And then just I plus plus or plus plus I, whichever. That could have been copy pasted from down here, right? We could have just copied this loop and then just changed the line inside, but we didn't. So I typed up my own loop. What are we supposed to do in this loop? It says read each element of user points. So we need to read doubles, right? So what we need to do to read a double is scnr dot next double, right? That's how you read an integer, or sorry, that's how you read a double. But you need a left side of the equal sign. So you're going to do user points subscript I. So you need entry I equals next double, and that will read a number and it will stick it into this location in the array. Since we're looping through all of the elements of the array, every element of the array will get a number. Um, and it should just work. The rest of the code they wrote themselves, and it worked. Next one. Array student nums is assigned with numvals input. Did they do that? Did they do that? Hold on. Oh yeah, they did actually. So the user has to type in the number, like the user's typing in a number, and that number is being stored in numvals. So we're actually going to make an array with however many things they type in. Okay. So that's what happens. Um, So it's assigned with numVals integers read from input. So all this code does that. So this is basically what we did in the previous exercise, right? The only difference is they're reading in integers instead of doubles. We were reading in doubles. But we can see that they declare an array. Oops. They declare an array on line 13, and then the loop from 14 to 16, they're looping through the array, and just like we did, they have a subscript over there on the left, and they're doing an SCNR next int to read integers. So they're reading in all their integers. So they did that. We don't have to, but that's what the first sentence says. Then it says, if the first element is less than the middle element, what? If the first element is less than the middle element, then assign Boolean first smaller with true. So the middle element? Okay, so what they're doing is they're comparing the first element to the middle element. Um, but the middle element, like when you have four things, there is no middle element, right? So they have to tell you what they mean by middle element, and that's why they have this note. Note the index of the middle element is dividing the length by 2. So what do they want? Um, let's forget everything we just said and just read what they say and copy it. So it says, if the first element is less than the middle element, how? So that's if the first element. So what's the first element of the array? Well, the array is student nums, right? So the first element of student nums is student num 0. Okay. If the first element is less than, cool, less than the middle element. So the middle element is student nums, but then what goes inside? Okay. So let's figure that out. So how are we going to calculate the middle element? Well, they told us that the middle element is the array length divided by 2, right? Dividing the array length by 2. So there's two ways to get the array length. So one of them is numVals was used as the array length. So we could do numVals divided by 2. And that apparently is going to be the middle element. That will work. If you actually want to use the length because it says divide the array length by 2, then instead of numVals, you would get the array length, which is student nums dot length, and then divide that by 2. So those numbers should be the same though. The length of the array and numVals are the same number. So anyway, that's the if statement, but then what are we going to do there? It says if the first element is less than the middle element, then assign Boolean first smaller. Does that variable exist? Yeah. With true. Otherwise, assign first smaller with false. So first smaller should be true if this thing happens. Okay. Now we could add an else here, by the way, and the other like in the else, right? We could do else, and in the else we could make first smaller true. What a lot of people would do here is not that. What a lot of people would do is they would, before your for loop, or sorry, if statement, before your if statement, you could set this to be false. So you could set that to be false, and then if the statement is true, we make it true. And that's equivalent to what they said, right? Because if this inequality happens, then we're going to make first smaller true, and otherwise it'll be false because that's what we set it to earlier, right? So that works. You don't technically need an if else there is kind of what I was doing, but you could use an if else if you so choose. All righty, one more and then we're done for today. So let's read it. integer array user score is declared with size num elements. There it is. They did it. Read num elements integers from input and store each integer into user score. Oh, okay, so we're writing a for loop again. Now, we can write the for loop from scratch, but as I said in exercise 1, uh, a lot of these problems have you looping through an array, and they loop through the array multiple times, which means that often in the code that you're looking at, you can find code that does almost exactly what you're trying to do anyway. So if we're looping through the array, I can copy this for loop that loops through the array and paste it up here, and then we just need to delete the middle from it, right? Just make it a blank for loop. Of course, we could write that from scratch just as easily because we've done it several times, but let's do this. So it says read num elements integers from input and store each integer into user score. Okay, so user score I equals, and we're going to read integers from the input. So that's scnr dot next int. So we just do user score I equals scnr dot next int, and we loop through the entire array doing that. And that's everything that they asked us for. And we got it right. Okay, so let me, before we stop, look at week 10. So we did only 3 sections here. The next lecture is going to specifically cover like a variety of things you can do with arrays. So we'll have a lecture where I kind of give you code for doing the same stuff that you're going to be doing in these exercises. And then we'll just run through a bunch of sections here. And hopefully that will be useful. All right. I think that's going to be it for now. So I will stop the recording and I will talk to you later.